On today's webinar are my fabulous executive education colleagues, including our webinar presenter, Allison Horstmeyer. They'll be responding to your chats questions throughout the webinar. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Blakesley, the Assistant Dean of Marshall School Business Executive Education. Tim, I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, everyone who's decided to take time to spend with us today. You know, I think we all are taking advantage during this time to continue our professional development. And so we really appreciate you spending time with us. You know, I was thinking about today's topic. We've tried to have, this is the fourth in our series, if some of you have joined us for previous ones. But this one's going to be interesting because I think now we're beginning to think about emerging and what is life going to be like as we come out of this pandemic. And certainly our new normal is going to have a lot of agility, innovation, creativity as we continue to collaborate together to figure out what that's going to be like. And at the center of that, I think, is going to have to be curiosity, right? We're going to have this open mindset. And so it's absolutely my privilege today to introduce you to Allison Horstmeyer. She actually is one of those rare individuals that kind of has a foot in two camps. She has been in professional services, where her specialty was in media and technology. She worked with clients such as NBC Universal, Liberty Media, Omnicom, but then she's also an academic, where she has recently joined us here at the USC Marshall School of Business Executive Education, where she is the Director of Client Development. She's also the inaugural research fellow appointed to the USC Annenberg Center for the Third Space Thinking, in which she contributes empirical rigor and thought leadership to soft skills development. Her doctoral research focuses on curiosity and associated mental, emotional, and motivational qualities. As workspace curiosity research is relatively a nascent area, Allison is one of the first emerging humanistic researchers to be looking at this research area. So it's my privilege to have you join us and listen to Allison today. Allison, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. We have such a great diverse representation of industries. We are going to ask you right now, what is one word to describe how you are feeling right now? It's in the chat box. Love to hear just that one word that can describe how you're feeling right now. We encourage participation. Oh, I like it. Uncertainty. Yes, that's a big one. Hopeful, excited, calm. That is all fantastic. Thank you for contributing that. Also, we encourage you, if you have a question, put it in the chat box. And if you know the answer, put it in the chat box and let us learn from each other. It's really great to have such a diverse skill set present with us today. Just quickly, so you know where we're headed, we're going to dive into the qualities of an expert mindset versus learner mindset. Then we're going to get into our common cognitive biases that show up in business, and I would argue these are also showing up in our personal lives. Then we're going to get into what curiosity is, why it matters, and hopefully you will see the relationship between cognitive biases and curiosity. And then we will get into some practical primers. As the research shows that 70% of learning happens by doing, we are getting ambitious with our breakouts, and we are including 3 breakouts. We may have to scratch the last one depending on time. My invitation for you is to really dive into those breakouts as an opportunity to make new friends and to get exposure to the context, the concept that we're describing by doing. All right, bloated, challenged, motivated. Oh, they keep on going, anxious, restless. Yes, so we have quite a spectrum of feelings happening. And if I had started this session asking you, do you tend to hold a learner mindset versus an expert mindset? I would have a feeling most of you said, absolutely, I hold a learner mindset. And the fact that you are here would demonstrate that. However, given the environment we are in, which is highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, what we call a VUCA environment, a term coined by the college army after the Cold War to make sense of the New World Order, which really describes what we are experiencing today, we tend to revert to our reactive tendencies. And those reactive tendencies are triggered by our primal part of our brain. And we tend to go for what is safe and familiar and is highly a guarded place to be. It feels safe, but I can guarantee you that safety is an illusion, it's temporary, and if you stay in that, you will lose the ability to be adaptive and agile. Korn Ferry defines agile learners as those who learn from past experiences and then apply those learnings to new situations, frequently add new skills, face new challenges, proactively face new challenges, and embrace ambiguity and changing conditions. And why I bring this up is because those are the qualities that you see under the learner mindset. And we know from Korn Ferry that those that have an agile learner mindset deliver 25% higher profit margins than their non-agile peers. Now, I'm not saying you can't be an expert in your domain. Clearly, we have a wealth of expertise in the audience. And you have incredible business acumen, you know your domain, and there's a reason you're in the roles that you are. What I am saying is that we have a tendency when we get triggered to be in survival mode is to be more guarded. And we tend to lean in to prove that we are right or this is the way to do it, where the learner mindset helps us to lean in to improve. And when we adopt that mindset, we're encouraging open-mindedness, intellectual humility, customer centricity, empathy, all the things that we need right now to have higher levels of emotional, mental, and social dexterity. So simply stated, expert tends to be about me, and the learner tends to be about we. Let me give you an example. So during my research, one of my study participants is a president of a hospital, manages 25,000 people. Clearly, he is an expert in healthcare. He specifically told me in our interview, he said, Allison, you know, I try to go into every staff meeting, every engagement with my C-suite with the assumption that I do not know. Because as soon as I go assuming that I know, I will get on the defensive side, I will run over people, I will be really directive, and I will not get the outcome that I'm looking for. And so in my experience with working with teens, regardless of the level, having this expert learner framework is a really easy way to acknowledge and be self-aware, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm acting like the expert, and to shift into that learner mindset and helping your teams do the same. All right, so let's move on into how we can support our learner mindset. So what the heck is a cognitive bias? It tends to be a systematic pattern of erroneous thinking, which affects our decisions and judgments. And it tends to be erroneous because it is highly subjective. We tend to view the world through the lens of all our experiences, and we kind of are then just closing off to what we know and what we have experienced. The opportunity with a learner mindset is the opportunity to create new neural connections in our brain. And we have the opportunity throughout our lifespan to create new neural connections, which helps us to broaden and build our perceptions, the way we interact with others, we get new experiences, and that encourages us to be more adaptable and agile. So what are the biases that tend to crop up the most? The first one is that darn confirmation bias. This is a good one. This is the one where we tend to be very emotionally invested or attached to a specific outcome or a specific solution, and we don't want to entertain contradictory information or new information that might require us to pivot. The second is the status quo bias. That's the one when we truly believe that change or informed risk-taking is inefficient. And I hope by the end of today, you will see that adopting a learner mindset, managing your biases, activating curiosity to encourage our experimentation and iteration is actually more efficient. The next bias that tends to crop up is that anchoring bias. And as a qualitative researcher, I love to get to what is underlying that quantitative data. I want to know the textures, why, how, and everything that goes along with that. If I only looked at the quantitative data, we would have a completely different presentation today. And so the invitation to you is check what you are anchoring your solutions in, or even your thinking. And if you're using the same indicators you've been using for the last 2 years, it might be a good time to revisit those, because I guarantee you might need to shift those slightly in order to be measuring the right things in this current environment. Framing bias. Oh, this is a good one. This is how you present a situation, or how a situation is presented to you, and you do it in ways so you can mitigate further loss. And can you see, if I'm presenting a situation where I'm trying to minimize the loss, it's not really rooted in reality, and then we're getting back to that skewed perception. But can you see how it would encourage confirmation bias? If I'm presenting and framing something in a certain way, then I'm only going to go get certain information that supports that that's the right perspective, and then perhaps I end up supporting status quo. The final bias is sunflower bias. This is the one where there's no pushing back. We just say yes, and it's really discouraged to be challenging the status quo and dissenting and having a devil's advocate. And I can tell you the research shows us that having dissension among team members sparks ideas and creativity. And we also want that because we know from the research that quantity of ideas gets us to quality of ideas. All right, so Tim, our first poll for the group, ready to go? What bias is most prominent in your organization now? Oh, our friend status quo bias. But you know, confirmation bias and sunflower bias are not too far behind. And I bet some of you struggled with choosing just one, because there is an interrelationship between the two. So if you're going to have status quo bias, I guarantee confirmation bias and sunflower bias are not far behind. And so there is an interrelationship between them, and it can cause a cascade effect through the organization, which does then obviously shut down our abilities to be open, encourage, putting those preconceived notions, assumptions to the side, and really looking and reframing. Reframing is such a powerful tool. I really encourage you practicing reframing as much as you can. And so we're going to close the poll, and we're going to move into our first breakout. And we are going to invite you to share with each other which of the biases do you revert to most, and how do these biases limit you to an expert mindset. And again, with the breakout, you'll see a screen that pops up. You will click to join breakout, and you will be with 4 or 5 other colleagues. Introduce yourself in the spirit of curiosity, be inquisitive, and say, hey, who are you? Where do you come from? And then we're giving you an opportunity to dive in. If you're on the phone, unmute or just take a listen. If you want to stay with me in the main room, you certainly can, but I really encourage you to take this opportunity to interact with your colleagues. All right, see you in 5 minutes. All right, we're back?
Yep.
Great. So I would be interested in the chat box if you want to share which bias you seem to revert to most, and what your key takeaway from the breakout was. So share with us, chat with us on what happened in that breakout session. What was your key takeaway from that? And as we wait to hear from you, we'll move right in, because now that we can identify our biases, and as I said, when I work with teams, having this bias taxonomy and a common language that you can use with your teams, yourselves, and other people you work with, it really helps to bring an awareness of these biases forward and on the table, so then you can work together as a team to manage them. And once we are able to manage those biases, Oh, I love the takeaways. That's great. Being forced to move away from the status quo has happy outcomes, so remember that. Thank you, Hillary. All right, so what is curiosity? The definition is the recognition, pursuit, desire, and exploration. There is a really high component of exploration going on in curiosity, and it's typically exploring those novel, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous events. Well, hold on a minute. Did I not describe in the beginning of our session, we are in a VUCA environment. We're in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So isn't it interesting that inside each and every one of us, inside each and every one of your team members, is the ability to navigate this environment? And curiosity is one of the 24 universal character strengths. There's over 400 studies, probably even more by now, on character strengths. And there's 24 that we all have, regardless of our religious beliefs, gender, our culture, what education we received. And so curiosity is one of those. Curiosity also is that ability to explore and drop in and immerse yourself in situations with the potential for new information and experiences. And this is important because it goes back to making those new neural connections. So if we have new information and we have new experiences, then we get to make those new neural connections and broaden our and build our intellectual curiosity, our social dexterity, our emotional dexterity, and our cognitive dexterity. One thing to know about curiosity is that it is autonomous, meaning it is self-directed. Certainly, there are talent development interventions such as executive coaching that can encourage curiosity, but at the end of the day, it is up to the individual to activate it. And this is something we will come back to. All right, so Adam, we have a poll on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. How well does your organization encourage or support curiosity? We're closing. All right. So this is very encouraging to see because the research tells a bit of a different story. And so this is actually, as a researcher, I'm really intrigued by this because recently a survey of 3,000 employees across UK, Germany, and China, 65% said, yes, curiosity is really good we need it for ideas. And then almost the same percent, 60% employees say they face obstacles to curiosity on a daily basis. Also, I just want to bring your attention to the awareness of a potential gap between C-levels and employees and organizations, because another research study of 23,000 employees, including C-level, 83% of C-level said, yeah, absolutely, I encourage curiosity, and only 52% of employees agreed. And so we do see a bit of a discrepancy. And so since we have so many industries represented, I thought it'd be interesting for you to see where your industry may be ranked. And we will get into the facets of curiosity in the next slide. I would argue that even those who are, quote, the leader category do have work cut out for them. And that's because the 4 obstacles that were cited from this study that are universal across all industries, the first obstacle to curiosity was top-down decision-making. The second obstacle was the preference for the status quo. So again, there is that darn status quo. The third obstacle was limited time for creativity, exploration, and experimentation. There's a separate study by MIT Sloan that shows that one of the top missing leadership attributes is encouraging experimentation. And we need to encourage experimentation and iteration so that we can get data points faster to manage ambiguity and uncertainty. The last obstacle to curiosity is a fear of being isolated for nonconformist and non-conventional thinking, essentially for challenging the status quo. And so my invitation to you is, what can you do to really flip that on its head? We really have to start encouraging environments where it is psychologically safe to challenge the status quo. So let's move into why curiosity matters. I just want to do a quick review of the research. So first, it does have a relationship with creativity. In fact, one study measured curiosity. You can measure curiosity on a scale of 1 to 7. And they found just 1 point increase. So going from a 3 to a 4 resulted in 34% higher creativity. We also know that curiosity, because of an openness to experiences and an openness to other people's ideas, tends to encourage what we call divergent thinking. This is coming up with discrete, independent ideas, which is a fancy way of saying ideational fluency. We also know in the research that there is a dopamine release. So dopamine is our feel-good hormone, and there's also a part of our brain that releases dopamine when we anticipate a reward. And anticipating a reward can come in the form of getting new information, and that helps us to stay intellectually engaged, and in turn helps with our learning and memory. We also see a relationship between curiosity and empathy. We also see this in the research at the USC Annenberg Center for Third Space Thinking, where we see a significant correlation between curiosity and empathy, because those that are activating their facets of curiosity do tend to be less reactive. They stay in their prefrontal cortex, which is where we have our creativity, and they do tend to be less judgmental and critical of others. Because curiosity is self-directed, remember, it is autonomous, when you're going and exploring and you're conceptual testing and you're working towards a goal, because that goal pursuit tends to be aligned with your intrinsic value, you've actually encouraged yourself to go forward, it does help arm you with a higher sense of resiliency to withstand the highs and lows of that pursuit. We also know in the research that because of this correlation with intrinsic motivation, it does offer us the opportunity to encourage well-being, more so than grit, and more so than trying to control for variables. And in essence, our biases are a way of trying to control for variables. And when we're trying to control, we actually are limiting ourselves to be resilient. Really exciting, and just like hot off the press early this year by a group out of George Mason University. They surveyed 1,000 US employees and 1,000 German employees. They measured curiosity and work engagement and mindfulness. And so interesting that on job satisfaction, work engagement, and healthy work relationships, curiosity outperformed mindfulness. It did not outperform mindfulness in the terms of burnout. So what this says to us, and it's really exciting, is that there's an opportunity to create talent development tools and environments in a way to cultivate curiosity, to support job satisfaction, and so on, and to complement that with our mindfulness tools and our mindfulness programs that are currently in our organizations to support prevention of exhaustion and fatigue associated with burnout. Now that we understand why curiosity matters, let's understand what it is. And interesting to note is that curiosity is not a linear progression of one facet of being incurious to curious. It's actually made up of several facets, and in my research, I see 4 facets. In other research, we also see the same thing. The first facet is this not knowing. Something happens. It can be quite jarring, like the environment we're in, or something maybe more on an intuitive level. My study participants talk about an intuition that they knew that there's something about a social norm or a prescribed way of behavior just wasn't aligned with who they were. And this activated an exploration. And curiosity is active. It is not passive. My study participants were very clear. You do curiosity. You can be interested, but with interest, you can actually do nothing. You can just observe. And so there is this active quality. It does take effort. In that active exploration is this level of openness. It's open-mindedness, and it's open to the experience that is happening and being receptive to those inputs. My study participants talk about an unfettered openness. When they are open, they actually have no agenda, no attachment to an outcome. And in this way, they find that actually their anxiety is reduced. And why I bring anxiety up is because there is anxiety in curiosity. You know, when I started my research naively, I was hoping that, you know, you couldn't be curious and anxious all at the same time. Fortunately, that is not the case. And it's not just being anxious and vulnerable in the beginning before you dive in. There's actually anxiety throughout your curiosity process and throughout the curiosity process of your team members, because as they're going through and conceptual testing and gathering information, they're going to come up and look for feedback, whether it's internal feedback or external feedback. And that triggers anxiety because it raises questions on how am I doing? Am I acting the way aligned with the intention of this endeavor? How am I being perceived? And so that is why we need to create environments in our organizations that really support psychological safety, that encourage failures so we can transform those failures into learnings, and so we can help people keep going. I bring these facets up to you because many times when I work with executives, they say, oh, I'm hiring for curiosity. I say, fantastic, that sounds wonderful. And so what are you doing within your teams, within your organization culture to support not knowing, active exploration, openness, and to really help people cultivate stress tolerance to manage the anxiety and confusion and doubt along the way? So enough of me talking. Soon we'll get to a breakout. I just really want to emphasize, because I have had other executive coaches and colleagues come to me and say, you know, Allison, my client is just not curious. This is not true. It's because we're holding on to an old definition of curiosity that means that you go from incurious to curious. In a sense, that's a framing bias. What the invitation for you here today is to understand, because curiosity is multifaceted, it's actually how you or somebody else is curious, and how we each are curious are going to be different. I will give you a quick example. Those folks that love certainty, they are curious. They will go and look for information. They will either, and they may even adjust their jobs and skill set. We call that job crafting, because they want to expand their competencies to get back to certainty. These are great executioners. We may have people that kind of like the pioneering and swimming in the uncertainty and like to experiment and have a higher stress tolerance and tend to be more open to new experiences. Those are your creators and innovators. We need everybody if we are going to do well in this environment and in the environment post-pandemic. So now it is your turn. We're going to go back to breakouts. You're going to meet some new friends and discuss with each other which facet of curiosity could you practice more of. So not knowing, openness, exploration, and stress tolerance, and why. And we'll see you back in 5 minutes. So as you're coming back in, welcome back. We'd love to know in the chat box.
Good to see you guys.
We'd love to know in the chat box, which facet did you identify, so we can share with others. Oh, stress man. Yeah, the stress tolerance, that's a good one. That is a new facet in the curiosity. So the stress tolerance, I really appreciate people saying that, because in the research and in my research, that is a newer dimension of curiosity that we are learning about. and that anxiety doesn't just happen at the beginning, it happens throughout, and we really need to create environments which can support the doubt, confusion, anxiety along the way. I see the not knowing. Yes, so thank you, Laura. A way to manage our fears, and we do have a sense of vulnerability, and it does take courage to dive in. So I appreciate you sharing that, Laura. Yes, more stress tolerance, some active exploratory behavior. Wonderful. All right, so let's move on. What we could do to put what we've learned into practice. And I specifically use the word practice because it is a practice. There are days where we're going to fall off, and the practice is coming back to supporting our learner mindset, coming back to activating our facets of curiosity and managing those biases. So one way we can do that is what I call put the advice monster to the side. I did not coin advice monster. I borrowed that from Michael Bungay Stainer. His TEDx video is included in the materials that we will be sending to you after this webinar. I really encourage you to watch it. It's very entertaining and informative. And so in my coaching engagements, especially if I have a leader who is trying to become more of a coaching leader, we really try to work with that executive on taking the time to let other individuals unpack it, unpack the situation, unpack the challenge, whatever is going on. And we do that with open-ended questions. And those typically start with a what or a how, similar to these questions here. And another way to encourage the unpacking is just to say, tell me more about that. If you run out of questions or there's silence, or supporting the silence and the pauses is also a nice way to step away from being the advice monster and just saying, tell me more. I know we want to be of value by giving advice, and I'm here to tell you that one way to be of value is actually to step back and let the other individual have the time to unpack it. So I know we were just in a breakout, but we really wanted to give you the opportunity to experiment with Tell Me More. So what we're going to do just for I think we'll just do it for 4 minutes. Tim will kind of make it shorter, is that we're going to be in groups of 4, and you're just going to divide yourselves into pair teams. And the first pair, one person will share a time when you should have been curious, but you weren't. And all the other partner can say in that team is tell me more, no commentary. And the other team is listening, and then you'll switch after a couple minutes and the second team will do the same. All right, it's just gonna be quick, have fun with it. If there's anybody in the main room that wants to experiment with Tell Me More, I'm happy to do a little role play with you.
Yes, this is Alba. I'd love you actually to give me an example of how that works. I'll say the tell me more and you give me an example.
All right, so let's see. All right, I was in dialogue with a colleague, and I really should have been more receptive to the information he was sharing with me, and I was so focused on getting my point across.
Tell me more, yes.
Well, you know, I think I was just having a bit of a rough day where I just really wanted to make this happen. And I don't think I was doing a good job of bringing this person along with me because I was getting kind of frustrated. Yeah.
Tell me more.
And, you know, I think it comes down because I'm kind of impatient and I really want just the best outcome for everybody. I get really passionate about what I do. And sometimes I just really think I might need to temper that passion and just take a step back and pause and see what happens.
I almost feel like I need to have that tell me more tattooed on me somewhere because I think it could work in personal relationships too.
Yes, absolutely. So did you notice, Alba, because you probably wanted to lean in and say something to me, right?
Well, because whenever you hear someone telling you, want to have a response rather than to like keep
Yes, because you want to be a value, you want to deliver something.
Right.
And did you notice by not doing that, you got more information?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we got to unpack. All right, we coming back, Tim?
Yep, folks are back.
Oh, folks are back. Okay, wonderful. I'm curious what you noticed. If you want to put in the chat box what you noticed from that exercise. Joseph and I were having a great conversation about sometimes when we do this exercise, you know, people so want to give advice or comment, and they find themselves really struggling with just asking, tell me more. And giving permission, yes, giving permission, thank you, Barb, for people to say more, to slow it down, We want to slow things down, especially in this environment, to let ourselves unpack. Yes, thank you, Abigail. Tell me more encourages deeper thinking. Wonderful. Yes, thank you, Jason. Right. Oftentimes open questions are hard on the spot. That's true, Laura. And so this is why the Tell Me More can help you kind of gather your thoughts around what those open-ended questions can be. And so Tell Me More is a nice way to kind of bridge that. All right, so let's get into some more practical tips. So we got the advice monster. Also, part of putting that advice monster to the side is an opportunity to offer open-ended feedback, what we call in the research metaphorical feedback, which is essentially creating a scenario or an analogy or a symbolic way to provide feedback. And in the research, we know that kind of going through to this approach offers the opportunity for iteration and experimentation. They actually did research among product iteration, and they found when the feedback was more open, they got more of a product iteration cycle than when there was directive feedback. It actually shut iteration down. Another great one, Tim, who introduced me at the beginning of the session, he is the master at plussing. I learn from him, I think, every day on a new way to plus. And this is when you are in a debate, and I hope you are in a debate, is to recognize, I hear what you're saying, Tim. Yes, and you share your point of view. If you say no, but, it shuts that person down, it puts them on the defensive, and it puts you into that expert stance. And finally, if you do get stuck, go back to your core values. In my research, I saw a very prominent relationship between a person's values and how they are curious. This is emergent research. I only have seen this in a couple other recent studies, and so we're just scratching the iceberg of this. But I do invite you to go back and get clear on your core values, and also set an intention in the morning. How do I want to show up today? Do I want to show up as the learner, or do I want to show up as the expert? And just come back to that intention. I also encourage you to sprinkle a little PRC. A PRC stands for pause, reflect, and choose. Just take a moment, check out where you are, and ask yourself, am I behaving or modeling as an expert or a learner? Am I checking my biases and assumptions at the door? Am I staying open? Am I asking a question and staying open to what I'm hearing, or am I asking a question and just shutting down? And am I helping others to reframe a situation? And am I asking and not answering? If you tend to be the ones that love to take the conversation over or drive to an end result, I encourage you to use WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? If you tend to be more introverted, which I've done with some of my engineering clients, WAIT can stand for why aren't I talking, and get into the conversation. And then finally, as I talked about, reconnecting to those values are super important. And most of all, if you could please remember to lean into improve and not to prove. that will help us all in this environment. I would love to hear how your practice goes. I'm a coach. I love to hear what's going on. If you have any questions about my research, please don't hesitate to email me. If you have any questions and I don't know the answer, we have tremendous faculty at USC Marshall, and so we certainly can find the answer. If you're interested in bringing this kind of work into your organizations, please also contact us. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you all for joining us today and actively participating in our webinar. Our next webinar on optimizing culture in times of crisis will be Friday, May 15th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with Terry Wolf. Once again, we want to thank you for your time today. We know you can be anywhere around the world and you decided to choose us for the last hour. We hope that you and your families stay safe during this time of uncertainty and fight on.